Breaking news. The United States Supreme Court just issued two major decisions that could boost the radical MAGA Project 2025. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. Project 2025 is a conservative plan to basically gut the federal government, fire civil servants, and make sure that from top to bottom, the U.S. government is staffed with people who are loyal to Donald Trump, not the U.S. Constitution. And the Supreme Court may have just ruled in a way that will help them do that. So, Marc, let's talk about these cases, starting with Loper and the Chevron doctrine.
What the Supreme Court did here is overturn a 40-year-old precedent that basically said when Congress writes laws, agencies that have expertise, that have the opportunity to tap the best and the brightest in implementing them, get to fill in the gaps. So if Congress passes a law and it has some play in the joints, it's a little bit vague in what exactly it means. The agency gets to use its expertise, gets to use its full-rounded understanding of the playing field to pass regulations and issue rules that fill in those gaps. And what the Supreme Court said now is no more of that. It is now the job of the courts, not the agencies, to interpret those laws and fill in those gaps.
Marc, help us understand why this ruling is so devastating to the norms we have as a country.
So look, the theory behind Chevron was that where you have these complicated laws passed by Congress, there are always going to be some uncertainties, and there are always going to be new circumstances that arise. And so we want a government of experts, people who have studied these areas, people who know what exactly the policy trade-offs and implications are. We want them interpreting these statutes in ways that make sense. They want them interpreting ways that will further Congress's intent. And so rather than having judges who are juggling dockets, one day they're hearing a criminal case, the next day they're hearing a landlord-tenant dispute or a contract dispute, rather than asking them to step in and figure out what the interstices in these statutes mean, we want to develop a body of people in the executive branch, civil servants very often, who bring this policy expertise. So this is nothing short than an attack on expertise in government, which is what Project 2025 is. When Project 2025 says it wants to do away with the deep state or wants to neuter the administrative state, what it's really saying is we no longer want government experts helping set policy. Instead, we want people loyal to Donald Trump. And we want courts appointed with judges appointed by presidents filling in those gaps.
So, for example, if Congress passes a law that says there should be clean water, the Environmental Protection Agency has the expertise, has the authority to say, here's how we best implement that law. And then when a lawsuit happens involving those statutes, the court defers to the EPA to say, you have the expertise. We'll rely on information you give to help us make the best decision and inform our ruling. Basically, the Supreme Court just overturned all that and said, courts, you should be the experts. Even though, as you said, judges are great with tax law, they're great with maybe civil procedure. They don't know the ins and outs of every single policy decision that the U.S. federal government needs to make.
Yeah, so you've hit it right on the nose, right? So let's say there's a statute, like you said, that says, make sure there's clean water. Well, there's going to be a question, like, what does clean mean? What does water mean? Does water mean just water on the ground? Does water mean water vapor in the air? Does water mean ice? Right? So the idea is that in the first instance, courts would let agency experts figure out when looking at the statute what makes sense. Now, to be clear, it didn't mean that those experts got to be the final say, right? The courts could still review those interpretations to say that they were just, wrong. But it gave, the word is deference, right? It gave deference in the first instance to agencies to interpret these laws, and they've taken that away, and they've done it because they have prioritized who is the expert in interpreting statutes as opposed to who is the expert in the underlying matter that the statutes are about.
So this Loper case basically guts expertise out of the federal government, but there is this other case, Fisher v. United States, that the Supreme Court ruled on. How does that case support Project 2025?
Yeah, so look, the Fisher case is a January 6th insurrection case, and Democracy Docket has been following not just Fisher, but all of the law about these, the insurrections, because they tie to the election denialist movement and ultimately to what we're going to see in the post-election in 2024. So I want to make sure everyone subscribes to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. They are an invaluable resource, and you can find a link above or in the show notes below. But this is the case that the Supreme Court ruled over what the scope is of a federal law that was passed as part of the Enron scandal, and whether or not, even though it was passed in the context of financial shenanigans, it could apply to January 6th defendants. It basically makes it a crime to obstruct an official proceeding. The question in that case was whether the obstruction has to relate to documents or can relate to, for example, assaulting police officers. And in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court said it only can, it has to relate to documents. It can't just be any kind of obstruction of any proceeding. And this is very important to the Project 2025, because Project 2025 is connected with the philosophy of lawlessness, right? I mean, think about it. What Project 2025 is saying is we want to fire civil servants. We want presidents to control the Department of Justice and who they prosecute, right? We need, in order for Project 2025 to succeed, you need people being willing to take pretty outlandish positions and make decisions not based on the merits, but making decisions based on politics. And by ruling the way the Supreme Court did in this January 6th case, it is emboldening people. It is telling the insurrectionists, you know what, we're going to take away some of the barriers to your conduct. We're going to excuse some of it. So it's atmospherically very important to Project 2025 if what Project 2025 wants is a new attorney general who is willing to weaponize the Department of Justice. It wants agencies that are willing to politicize their decision making to benefit Donald Trump. Now, obviously, we don't yet have the immunity decision. That's the final piece of this puzzle. But this is a very important decision for the election denier movement and for the people who don't want there to be merit-based decision-making in government.
The Supreme Court has basically gutted expertise in government. They kind of gave a stamp of approval to some lawlessness. If you're Republicans, what do you do next in light of these decisions?
Look, I think you take this all as good news and you keep moving forward. Look, we've talked about the fact that Republicans with Donald Trump as their leader have been able to shift the Overton window of what is acceptable. What we saw in the aftermath of 2020 was at the time viewed as wholly unacceptable. Well, here we are in 2024, and you have, people in prison that Donald Trump says are political hostages, right? And that has become the norm now in the Republican Party. And we continue to see the shift of what is acceptable, so that now, Project 2025 talks about the politicization of the Department of Justice as if it's just like a normal thing. So I think if you are the Republican MAGA movement, or you are the people behind Donald Trump or behind Project 2025, you figure, what's the next norm we can bring? What's the next thing we can do? What's the next court ruling we can have? And Democracy Docket has previewed what that may be. We see the fringe independent state legislature theory, which would essentially destroy election law, enforcement of restrictions on state legislature passing laws that restrict voting rights, or even laws that make sure that the winner of the election actually gets the seat. We see that case now. We see the efforts to bring those cases back before the U.S. Supreme Court. So, Paige, there's no good news in this. This is why everyone needs to do everything they can between now and Election Day to make sure that you are protecting democracy. Because, I don't want to say no one's going to protect us but ourselves, because the courts still are protecting us in courtrooms around the country. But citizens need to be active and vigilant between now and the election to make sure that we don't let the bad guys move the norms and what is acceptable further. So we need to speak out against it. We need to disagree with it. And we need to call out the kinds of terrible election denialism and undermining of democracy that we're going to see between now and then. Thanks for watching this episode of Democracy Docket. Make sure you are subscribed to our free daily and weekly newsletters. The link is in the show notes below. We will see you soon.